Week 12 of the fantasy football season is here. We got 3 games on Thursday, a game on Friday, a full slate on Sunday, and Monday Night Football, which means you're going to have a lot of tough decisions to make because you got a lot of good playmakers to choose from. So we brought in Michael Fabiano, our senior fantasy analyst at Sports Illustrated. Fabs, who are we starting at quarterback this week? It looks like maybe we're starting a couple quarterbacks that we didn't draft on draft day.
Yeah, that's right. By the way, happy Thanksgiving to everybody out there. CJ Stroud, who last week, he threw for a lot of yards, but he had a lot of interceptions too. From a fantasy perspective, it wasn't a great game, but I like this week's matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Their defense has allowed 20-plus fantasy points to 5 quarterbacks this season, so start CJ Stroud. And how about Joshua Dobbs? Last week, the numbers weren't great, but he did rush for a touchdown. He's got the Bears this week on Monday Night Football. If you're in dire straits at quarterback, maybe you lost Joe Burrow, this is a nice matchup. Field Generals have averaged the 6th most fantasy points when facing Chicago, so Dobbs is in a good spot.
And on your sit list is a couple of veterans that aren't good for this week, but may I just say, maybe look forward to their playoff schedule because it does get better down the stretch.
And Russell Wilson has not been putting up great numbers lately, 15 or fewer fantasy points in 3 of his last 5 games. And he's got the Browns this week, and the Browns are a red flag for me when I'm looking at the matchups, especially against quarterbacks. They have allowed just 2 quarterbacks to score more than 13.8 points against them, Jen. And those 2 quarterbacks both rushed for 2 touchdowns. That's probably not going to happen for Russell Wilson. And then Matthew Stafford. This isn't even about the matchup. It hasn't mattered who Stafford's playing. The numbers are just not great. He hasn't scored 17 points in a single game this season. Cooper Kupp is banged up. So I'd fade Stafford unless I'm in a Superflex league.
Moving over to the running back position, who are you firing up this weekend?
Love Rachaad White. He was one of my sleeper breakouts in the beginning of the season, and it didn't seem like it was going to happen. But lately, he's been fantastic. 15-plus points in 6 straight games, 17-plus in each of his last 4. He's got the Colts this week. Really good matchup. They've allowed the 4th most points to running backs since week 8. So start Rachaad White. And I like Isiah Pacheco. And he has had 3 stinkers in a row. I know he looked good running the ball against Philadelphia, but he was held under 10 points. I think he's going to be much better than that this week against the Raiders. Their defense has allowed the 6th most fantasy points to running backs, including 4 who've gone over 18 against them. Start Isiah Pacheco.
All right, which running backs are staying on our bench?
These are more bewares than hard sits. I'll start off with James Cook. Listen, you're playing the Eagles. I don't care who you are. Unless you're elite, you're probably going to be on this list. And the Eagles have allowed the fewest fantasy points to running backs, the fewest yards to running backs. They're very tough against that position. So James Cook is a risk. And so is Javonte Williams. You know, Jen, we were so excited about JW. It looked like everything was starting to go in his way. And then last week, decline in snaps, decline in touches. Samaje Perine led the team in targets out of the backfield. And now he's got who? The Browns. Their defense has allowed just 2 running backs to beat them for more than 14.2 points. So Javonte's probably no more than a high-end flex starter this week, and a risky one at that.
You've got one of my favorite players on your start list at wide receiver. This is a player that I have on all my teams, and hopefully you guys picked him up on the waiver wire earlier in the season too. So get to it.
And that's Tank Dell. And yeah. I went into the season with a little bit of trepidation because he's just not a big guy. And historically, small wide receivers have not done well. Hey, here's one for the small guys. I'm included in that list. He's been great. 18-plus points 5 times in his last 8 games. He's got the Jaguars this week. Really good matchup. Now, if Noah Brown comes back, maybe the targets decline a little bit. But right now, it's really hard to sit the Tank. And then Michael Pittman Jr. is in a great spot against the Buccaneers this week, coming off a bye. Overall, 10 wide receivers have scored at least 16 points against Tampa Bay. They've been really bad against wide receivers lately. Start Michael Pittman.
All right. You are sitting a couple of wide receivers that have good, name value, but there's a lot of question marks with their quarterbacks.
Right. Amari Cooper in 2 games where Dorian Thompson-Robinson has started single digits in both games. He had 15 targets to David Njoku last week, the rookie did. Amari Cooper did not see nearly as many targets. And I'm just worried about him. Plus, Patrick Surtain, bad matchup against Denver. Amari Cooper's a fade for me. He was last week, too. And George Pickens, I think, has been on this list, Jen, for like 3 weeks in a row. Until he wakes up, I'm going to keep him here against Cincinnati. The thing is, the Steelers are running the ball a lot. They're using Najee Harrison lately, Jalen Warren. It's not a great matchup either. I think this is going to be a lower scoring game. I would fade George Pickens again.
And I hope a change of defensive coordinator does help out the Steelers a bit, because it should be a juicy matchup for wide receivers and quarterbacks this week. But you're right. You just can't use George Pickens until you see that getting done. Let's move over to the tight end position, where there's a lot of needs. Some of us lost Mark Andrews this week. So who can we start? Who can we feel comfortable about?
I had Evan Engram as a sit-em last week, and he didn't have a good game because he was playing against the Titans. This week, it'll be better because he's got Houston. Their defense has allowed 9+ points to 7 tight ends, including Engram, who beat them for almost 14 points back in week 3. So start Evan Engram. And listen, I've got to go with David Njoku. David Njoku has had 15 targets last week with DTR under center. He's got the Broncos this week. They've allowed the most points at tight ends. And heck, you got to give it up to Njoku. He has been one of the more consistent tight ends in fantasy football lately. And the rookie seems to have taken a shine to him. So start David Njoku.
And who are we sitting at the position?
Cole Kmet. And Cole Kmet burned a lot of people last week. In the first game back with Justin Fields, the numbers weren't there. He targeted DJ Moore a lot. And this week, he's got the Vikings. Since week 8, just one tight end has beaten them for more than 9.6 points. I'd say Cole Kmet's a risk-reward, low-end tight end 1. And then Hunter Henry. I got to be honest with you, Jen. There's just not a lot of matchups I like this week at tight end. Some people may be thinking I could play Hunter Henry. The Patriots don't have many options in the passing game, but the Giants have allowed just 2 touchdowns to tight ends, and the position has averaged fewer than 10 points per game against Big Blue. So Hunter Henry is a fade for me on Thanksgiving weekend.
There you have it, folks. Don't forget to set those fantasy football lineups before you start your turkey dinner on Thursday, because you don't want to pass out and have a nap and forget to start the right guy. For all the start sits for your fantasy teams, be sure to visit us at si.com/fantasy.